Man in the future manipulates his past self. Everything starts when a CIA agent gets to learn that you can manipulate time. Tenet's another masterpiece of Christopher Nolan, released in 2020. The protagonist leads an undercover CIA rescue during a fake terrorist siege at the Kyiv Opera House on a day called the 14th. A curiously acting agent with a curious gun and a red trinket saves him from CORD. CORD, or the Rapid Operational Response Unit, is a special-purpose unit of the Ukrainian National Police. The protagonist, yes, he doesn't have a name in the movie, just the protagonist, manages to get the artifact, but his crew gets sabotaged, kidnapped, and tortured. So he takes a suicide pill, but wakes up to discover it was a fake. And although it was a test, he managed to pass after all. Then he's recruited by a secret group known as Tenet, and they brief him about bullets with inverted entropy that go backward through time. This is where it gets interesting. When you fire the gun, the bullet should leave the gun to your target, but the inverted bullets come from the target to your gun, and that's how they go backward in time. So the protagonist tracks these inverted materials down to an Indian billionaire and a weapons dealer in Mumbai. For this, he gets out from a British intelligence agent named Neil. He finds out that Priya Singh, the billionaire's wife, is the one who knows what's going on. Priya informs the protagonist that the time-reversing technology is controlled by a Russian arms dealer named Andrei Sator, who's in contact with the future. The protagonist contacts Sir Michael Crosby, a wealthy British intelligence agent, who informs him that an explosion occurred in the now abandoned Russian city of Stalsk 12. He teaches the protagonist that to reach Sator, he must contact his practically estranged wife, Kat. Kat's an art appraiser who verified a forged Goya picture bought by Sator from her friend Arepo, and is now being used to blackmail her. At a restaurant, the protagonist meets Kat and they talk. She also describes trying to love him again to see if he would let her go free. But Sator gave her the option of staying or leaving and never seeing her kid again. She claims she saw a woman jump off their yacht while on vacation in Vietnam. Sator's men soon arrive at the restaurant. The protagonist fights his way out and escapes, but one of them flees with Kat just as the protagonist finishes the remaining henchmen. To seek Kat's assistance, they attempt to steal the Goya from Sator's Freeport facility in Oslo Airport, but are stopped by two masked men who emerge from either side of a temporal stile in the Pentagon. Both antagonists flee before the protagonist and Neil discover who they are. But yeah, Neil does see one and stays quiet about it. Priya explains in Mumbai that it was a turnstile, a device that inverts entropy. The two men were the same person, traveling in opposite directions through time. She also reveals that Sator sabotaged his Kyiv CIA team, but CORD obtained the artifact, plutonium-241, and is transporting it through Tallinn. The protagonist and Neil arrange a highway heist and successfully take plutonium from an armored vehicle, but they're thwarted by an inverted car. After that, they're attacked by an inverted Sator who's holding Kat captive. The protagonist hides the artifact and saves Kat, but they're captured and taken to Sator's Tallinn Freeport, where the inverted Sator confronts them and shoots Kat with an inverted gunshot. When the Tenet troops under Commander Ives come, Sator uses a turnstile to flee. The protagonist suspects them and confronts Neil with questions about who these guys are. Neil informs him that they're Priya's men, led by Ives. They all invert to heal Kat's wound. The inverted protagonist returns to the ambush to collect the artifact, but is stopped by Sator, who snatches it. The car follows them until they notice an inverted Sator in it, holding a forward Kat at gunpoint. In between them, a smashed Saab on the road flips back and drives rearward. Sator motions for the protagonist to hand over the plutonium, but the protagonist only hands him an empty orange case before throwing the plutonium into the Saab. The protagonist deduces Sator and his gang's plan. They're doing a temporal pincer movement, in which they go both forward and backward in time by entering a temporal stile after the operation and then moving the opposite direction through time. Despite being told not to, the protagonist chases Sator back to the temporal stile, where he discovers that he is the driver of the Saab. He places a radio device on the road in an empty orange shell and waits for it to be returned to a car. He pursues it, and it turns out that Sator witnessed the plutonium flying from the Saab back into the hands of the front protagonist. From the device, he learns that Sator has assembled the algorithms that are being transported to the hypocenter. During the chase, the Saab crashes with the protagonist upside down. Sator burns the car, which turns to ice, and steals the algorithm component off screen. Ives' crew saves the protagonist. To uninvert, the protagonist must go back in time to the Oslo Freeport and fight his earlier self to enter its turnstile, accompanied by Neil and Kat. In Oslo, Priya informs him that Sator now possesses all 9 components of the algorithm, a mechanism required by future enemies to invert the entropy of the Earth and destroy its past. She wanted Sator to obtain the artifact to unveil the remaining 8 parts in preparation for his death drop. Based on his earlier chat with Crosby, the protagonist learns it's a nuclear hypocenter exploded on the 14th near Sator's hometown of Stausk 12. However, Sator is found to be dying of incurable pancreatic cancer and has gone omnicidal, claiming that if he must die, he'd rather spread death to all of humanity. Sator isn't seeking plutonium, but rather some future algorithm or the 9 pieces of fake plutonium that can force the world's entropy time direction to reverse. The algorithm will be built in the future by a future scientist as a technique to turn back time, because their future Earth has been wrecked by current-day people's mistakes. Sator intends to execute the algorithm as a doomsday device, reversing entropy for the entire planet and destroying everything on it. The protagonists, Neil and Kat, journey back in time with Sator in a cargo ship container to Oslo. The trio invades the Freeport Art Storage facility once more, entering the temporal stile that allows Kat to travel back in time and have her gunshot wound treated. The protagonist soon realizes that he was, in reality, the mysterious antagonist during their initial operation at the Freeport, and he must fight his past self to proceed. The protagonist meets with Priya to ask her to warn his former self of Sator's threat. She, on the other hand, swears she will not modify what's about to happen. The protagonist is looking for assurance that Kat will be safe. This is because she has seen much too much of what they're attempting to conceal, a loose end. Priya gives him her word for it. She also informs him that Tenet will be established in the future. She claims that Ives has assembled a team for the task. They fly back in time, where the protagonist and Neil attempt to rescue the Doomsday device from Sator's soldiers from the future in Stausk 12, while Kat is with her husband on his yacht, attempting to prevent him from killing himself before the Doomsday device is secured. They operate in a temporal pincer maneuver, with the red team moving ahead and the blue team moving backward to cover the red team's extraction. Neil is on the blue squad, while the protagonist and Ives are on the red team. This is a diversionary attack to allow the protagonist and Ives to steal the algorithm before it's detonated. Volkov, one of Sator's men, traps them in the hypocenter, and Sator telephones from Vietnam to explain that the adversaries are fleeing the repercussions of climate change. As Sator hangs up, an inverted soldier wearing a red trinket sacrifices himself, allowing them to flee with the algorithm. The clock is ticking. Neil, who is switched midway, tosses a rope through the hole in the tunnel's roof, and the protagonist and Ives cling on as they're pulled up. On the boat, Kat kills Sator. The explosion occurs, yet the planet is not destroyed. Kat recognizes herself as the woman she saw on the boat and jumps into the ocean. Ives divides the algorithm into 3 parts and distributes them to himself, the protagonist, and Neil. Ives stresses the importance of keeping it a secret. Neil hands his piece to the protagonist as he prepares to return. The protagonist then realizes Neil has a red thread on his back, inferring that Neil was the masked man who both saved him during the Opera Siege and the blue team member killed by Volkov inside the tunnel. He understands that both events happened. As he now understands his friend's fate, the protagonist feels sad. Neil reveals that the future protagonist hired him into this operation in the past, and that he's thus known him for years, but that he must now return to the recent reality in which an inverted Neil dies. Neil says the protagonist that he'll see him later and returns to the operation with the blue team. Later, as Priya is going to kill Kat with her knowledge, the protagonist kills Priya first, realizing he created Tenet. After the events of the film, the protagonist saves Kat, explaining that it's his first job to tie up loose ends, and that he's been the leader of Tenet operations for 2 years in the past. That's the end of the story. But yes, I know you have a lot of doubts. It's okay, as after the release of the movie, many Nolan fans were left with more questions than answers. Many commentators believe that the secrecy was motivated by the film's complexity rather than mystery. Even the Tenet cast has struggled to answer the question, what is Tenet about? The confusion, though, should not detract from the film's wonderfully enjoyable parts. Tenet demands your attention with reverse hand-to-hand fighting sequences, massive gun clashes, and mind-bending car chase sequences. The stunts, effects, and ambition of the picture cannot be attributed to anyone other than Christopher Nolan. Anyhow, I think you deserve some explanations for the story. Tenet, contrary to popular belief, is about time manipulation rather than time travel. Rather than going forward decades as in Back to the Future, the characters can rewind and fast forward through time. This is clearly explained when the scientist enables loose bullets to fly off a table and into her hands. The bullets are traveling backward in time, but the people remain still. Inversion occurs when a person or object goes through a temporal turnstile. Tenet's villain, Andrei Sator, designed the turnstiles. They appear several times throughout Tenet, but the first time is during the Freeport sequence, when the protagonist is wrestling with a masked trooper. Later in the film, the turnstiles are color-coded on either side to indicate which side is which. Red indicates forward transit through time, while blue indicates backward movement. Whatever passes through a temporal turnstile is automatically inverted. Once on the other side, time is reversed, but only for the thing or person that passed through. Time continues forward for everyone else. When someone is inverted, they can walk backward for an unlimited amount of time, allowing them to engage with an earlier version of themselves. However, inverted time continues to run at the same rate. So if you want to go to an event that happened a week ago, you'll have to wait a week. It seems that the unknown designer of inversion technology permitted it to be weaponized into the algorithm known as plutonium-241. This is capable of flipping the entire course of time rather than simply individual things. Regrettably, the inversion developer committed suicide, but not before breaking the algorithm into 9 tangible pieces and hiding them throughout time. If the algorithm were piled together to rebuild the ultimate formula, all events on Earth would begin to flow backward. The Earth's inversion is thought to produce a catastrophic disaster that would annihilate everything that ever existed. As Sator is trying to collect the pieces and destroy the world, the protagonist must recover the algorithm's final piece to stop it. So let me explain what happened at the Opera House. The protagonist and his colleagues dress up as the real Ukrainian SWAT team and slip in alongside them. The Ukrainian squad enters and begins to wipe out the terrorists, while the protagonist hurries off to the box seats to rescue an asset, because the entire siege is a cover for assassinating him. To validate one another, they exchange a code word. We live in a twilight world, and there are no friends at dusk. Following a sequence of events in which the protagonist attempts to obtain a portion of the algorithm, the protagonist goes in to defuse bombs. While gathering them, the protagonist is stopped by another SWAT team member who orders him to plant a bomb. As the SWAT member is shot by a masked third party, the protagonist notices a hole in the wood paneling begin to heal. The protagonist sees a red string on his unknown savior's back as he turns to flee. We'll discover later that it was Neil. So, Tenet is the name of the organization that the protagonist established to keep Earth's timeline running smoothly. Tenet's temporal pincer is where things get complicated. The pincer movement is a military tactic in which an enemy is attacked from both sides at the same time. Tenet's pincer includes 2 teams attacking a location from both directions in time, forwards and backwards, hence the name temporal. That's all about it. I suggest you watch the movie once, if not 10 times, to grab the idea. So that's all for today's video. If you made it this far, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon for more awesome content. Thanks for watching.